The stage lights blazed. Steve Harvey swaggered out like he owned the sun, his smile wide enough to light every corner of the studio. Applause thundered. Cheers bounced off the walls. The man was in his element. He clapped his hands once. "Let's talk purpose, y'all," he boomed, voice rich with that signature mix of preacher, father figure, and street-smart survivor. "Not just goals. Not just grind. I'm talking real deep, can't sleep purpose." The crowd leaned in, laughing, nodding, already eating out of his hand. He was midway through a gritty, soul-stirring story from his youth, cold nights, empty fridge, dreams built from scraps, when a producer, pale and wide-eyed, rushed toward the stage. She whispered into his ear. "Just a few words." And just like that, everything changed. Steve's face twisted, confusion, curiosity, then something deeper, heavier. "Wait, what?" he murmured. He turned to the camera, his tone suddenly hushed. Folks. I've just been told there's a message. For me. From someone I never expected." A hush fell over the room. Then the screen behind him came alive in gold and crimson. A crest. A title in bold, regal font. "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso." The silence now was absolute. No murmurs. No coughs. Just breath held tight. Steve blinked. "Burkina Faso," he repeated, almost under his breath. "Why would the president of Burkina Faso send me a message?" He sat, slowly, like his legs had forgotten how, gripping the chair's arms as if they were life vests. "Roll it," he said, voice trembling. The screen faded to a quiet room, simple desk, flag fluttering gently, warm amber light. Then came the man himself, President Ibrahim Traoré. Strong features. Eyes full of storm and soul. He looked into the camera and spoke. "Mr. Steve Harvey," he began, his English steady, wrapped in a lilting West African accent, "I speak to you not as a president today, but as a brother." The audience gasped softly. Steve leaned forward, one hand clenched, knuckles white. "You do not know me, sir. But we know you," Traoré continued. "In the villages of Burkina Faso, in places where roads do not reach, your voice reaches. Your words echo, not as entertainment, but as hope." Steve's jaw slackened. His lips moved, no sound. "I watched you," the president said, voice thickening, "from afar. As we fought for peace. As my people suffered, rebuilt, endured. I saw your tears for others. I saw you lift strangers with laughter. I saw you give when no one was watching." A sniffle echoed from the crowd. "In our land," Traoré went on, "we have a name for that kind of heart. We call it the heart of the sun, one that warms, that burns, that refuses to fade even in darkness." Steve exhaled shakily. One tear escaped, silent, slow. He didn't wipe it seriously. "This is not politics," Traoré said, voice now trembling with sincerity. "This is personal. Because when I was just a soldier with no flag behind me, when fear sat heavier than armor on my chest, your story reminded me, we rise not by titles, but by truth." And then, silence. For a heartbeat. Then Traoré locked eyes with the lens and said, clear and fierce, "From a boy with nothing in America, to a man carrying a nation in West Africa, I thank you." Steve opened his mouth. Nothing came. He pressed a hand to his chest. A soft "wow" escaped. The president smiled gently. "Even the strongest men," he said, "need to know they still matter." Then, in more, his native tongue, he added something low and melodic. Steve turned to his team. "What did he just say?" he asked, voice hoarse. A translator stood and replied, he said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve's shoulders shook. He dropped his head into his hands. The audience? In tears. People held each other. Cameramen sniffled, struggling to keep the shot steady. No music played. No graphics danced across the screen. Just raw, uncut emotion. A man floored by truth, by unexpected grace. When Steve finally looked up, his eyes were wet but clear. "You never think, your words go that far," he said, voice barely above a whisper. You just try to survive. Be real. Help somebody." The audience clapped gently, a tender, broken rhythm of awe. Steve raised a hand. "No. No applause. This ain't about me." He looked straight at the camera. "This is about purpose." Backstage, producers gestured wildly, cut to commercial. Break. Switch. Steve waved them off. "Nah. Keep it rolling. I want the world to hear every second. Don't stop the feed." Then, as if the universe heard him, the screen flickered. And the president returned. But this time, it wasn't a recording. Live feed. Real time. Traoré smiled. Warm. Steady. Present. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "for once, let me speak to you, man to man. Not from one country to another, but from one dreamer, to another." Silence again. But this silence was different, thick, electric, the kind that holds its breath. President Traoré leaned in toward the camera, eyes glowing not with pride, but memory. "You see me now as a president," he began, his voice gentle, wrapped in the hush of the studio, "but I was once a boy, with no shoes." A ripple moved through the room. Steve bowed his head, hands pressed together, fingers twitching slightly. "I walked barefoot to school," the president continued, his words slow, deliberate. "I carried books tied with string. At night, I went to sleep hungry, not knowing if I would wake to hope, or to more hunger." Steve exhaled sharply. Shoulders trembling. He didn't speak. Couldn't. "And when I was a teenager," Traoré said, his voice now edged with steel, "I saw war. I saw men fall. I saw mothers weep. I saw boys disappear behind guns too big for their hands. I saw people give up." He paused, just long enough for the weight to settle. "But I also saw people rise. A flicker. A heartbeat." The president smiled faintly. "And then, the twist. One day," he said, in a crowded internet cafe, among the static of ancient computers and dust-covered keyboards. "I saw you, Steve Harvey." Steve's head jerked up. "I saw your video, Don't Give Up." I didn't understand all the words. But I understood the fire. The tears. The fight in your voice. The ache behind your laughter. Gasps from the audience. Steve stared at the screen like it had reached out and touched him. "That video," Traoré said, voice tightening, "was not just a message. It was a hand across the ocean. A light in a room that had none. That day, a boy in Burkina Faso, me, began to believe he could be more than his pain. You could hear hearts breaking. People wiping their eyes. One woman clutched her chest. Steve. Still frozen. So," Traoré continued, "when I heard your voice again last week, talking about purpose, I knew it was time I spoke back." Steve covered his mouth. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to hold the pieces of himself together. But Traoré wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the lens. Lowered his voice. Now it was personal. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "you once said, you wanted to visit Africa. Not as a star. Not for press. But as a brother. As someone who wanted to give, not take." Steve nodded instinctively. "Yes," he whispered. "I did." "Well," said the president, "I invite you now, not as a celebrity, but as family. Come to Burkina Faso. No cameras. No stage. Just us. Just truth. Come and see what your voice built in silence. Gasps. Applause. Tears. Shock. The studio ignited. Steve clutched the edge of the table like the ground might shift. His lips trembled. But the president wasn't done. There is an orphanage, Traoré said. In Ouagadougou. The children there know your name. They laugh with your jokes. They pray with your words. They believe they matter, because you mattered. Steve stood. Couldn't stay sitting. The crowd stood with him, not a cheer, but reverence. As if they, too, had been invited. Then came the line that cracked him. In 7 days, said the president, they will gather in the village square. Waiting to meet the man whose voice crossed oceans, and healed hearts. Boom. The moment landed. You could feel it in your bones. Steve didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face said everything, shock, humility, the kind of awe that turns into prayer. The journey. By sunrise, Steve was already packing. No entourage. No network press release. Just a man and a carry-on, and a heart full of questions. The world erupted, headlines everywhere. A message that crossed oceans. Steve Harvey breaks down on live TV. Burkina Faso's president moves American icon to tears. But Steve? He wasn't going for headlines. He was going, for them. As his plane cut across the Atlantic, he stared out the window. The clouds below stretched like dreams too big to touch. He saw his younger self, Cleveland, poverty, nights with nothing but hunger and hope. Why me, God, he whispered. No answer. Just silence. And maybe, that was the answer. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. Would they know him? Would he live up to their dreams? Ouagadougou. In the courtyard of the orphanage, under a blazing African sun, President Traoré stood before a sea of children. Their eyes wide. Their hearts wide open. He's coming, he said simply. The courtyard erupted. Screams. Laughs. Little feet pounding dirt in celebration. But near the back, under the shade of a mango tree, one small girl sat quietly. Her name was Marta. 10 years old. Quiet. Delicate. But her eyes, ancient. Clutched to her chest, a small, frayed notebook. She turned to her caretaker and asked, barely a whisper, will he read it? Will he care? The woman knelt beside her, smiled. He already has, child. He already has. Inside the notebook. Dear Mr. Steve. My name is Marta. My papa died 2 years ago. My mama is sick. Sometimes I cry at night. One day, someone played your video. You said you were born to do something great. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us, even if you didn't know we were listening. I hope you smile when you see us. Your little sister. Marta. That night, the courtyard became a village of light. Children sang. Painted signs. Drew pictures of a man they'd never met, but who had found them. Marta stayed by the tree. Notebook to her chest. Silent. The arrival. No fanfare. No marching band. Just sun. Wind. Dust. And destiny. Steve Harvey stepped off the plane in Ouagadougou. No entourage, no flashing lights. Just 2 translators, a local aide, and a single handwritten sign. Welcome, Brother Steve. He took a deep breath. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. His heart thundered. The van rattled through narrow streets, past worn stucco homes, roadside vendors with weathered hands, and barefoot children who chased the wheels and waved like he was a king returning from exile. But Steve Harvey didn't feel like royalty. He felt small. Humbled. Unworthy. As they neared the orphanage gates, his throat tightened. He wasn't ready for what he saw. Hundreds of children stood waiting. No red carpet. No flashing bulbs. Just paper signs. Crayon scribbles. Big, brave letters that screamed straight to the soul. You matter. Thank you, Mr. Steve. We love you. Steve blinked fast, fighting it. But it was no use. The tears came. And once they started, they didn't stop. Then, through the crowd, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared. Not in a pressed suit. Not with guards. But in a simple white shirt, a piece of traditional Faso Dan Fani cloth wrapped around his shoulders. No ceremony. Just brotherhood. He stepped forward and embraced Steve with both arms. Not a polite handshake. A hug. Fierce. Human. Real. Welcome home, brother, he said softly. Steve couldn't speak. His body shook in his arms. Then. A voice. High. Fragile. From the crowd. Steve. Steve. Heads turned. A small figure broke through the children. Marta. 10 years old. Notebook pressed tight against her chest, trembling hands reaching forward. She stepped close. Looked up. This is for you, she whispered. Steve knelt. Slowly. Carefully. Eyes level with hers. He took the notebook with hands that could barely hold steady, and opened it. He read. No cameras. No spotlight. Just the scribbled words of a child with a broken heart and unshakable faith. And Steve Harvey, strong, unshakable, made for TV Steve, wept. Openly. Uncontrollably. Not the tidy kind of crying. The ugly, holy kind. The kind that rewrites you. The children didn't cheer. They didn't rush forward. They stood still, reverent. Watching a man be broken and rebuilt in real time. Because this wasn't a celebrity visit. This was a divine appointment. The moment after. Later, during a quiet commercial break back in his U.S. studio, Steve sat alone, motionless. Still processing what had just aired. The raw footage. The message. The child. A producer stepped in, holding a page. Her voice a whisper. Steve. You'll want to read this part. It was a full translation of Traoré's earlier speech, one line highlighted. When I was a boy hiding under my grandmother's market stall, I'd hear her laugh as she listened to your voice on a crackling radio. She didn't speak English. But your spirit made her smile. That voice helped raise me. Steve clamped a hand over his mouth. His voice cracked. Oh my God. The camera came back on. But there was no act to slip into. No character. Just a man. He looked straight into the lens and whispered. Y'all, this world, it's smaller than we think. And our words, they travel farther than we could ever imagine. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. The turning point. The segment ended. Producers moved to cue the next guest, but Steve stood still, gripping the letter like it was part of his body. No. He couldn't move on. He walked off set, into his dressing room, phone already in hand. He didn't hesitate. Get me a line to Ouagadougou, he said to his producer. I need to speak to President Traoré. Today. The producer blinked. Yes, sir. Right, Sarai. 2 hours later, a secure Zoom link connected. There he was. President Ibrahim Traoré. Calm. Steady. radiating quiet strength. Steve's voice wavered. "Mr. President. I'm just a comedian from Cleveland. I never dreamed my voice would reach someone like you." Traoré smiled warmly. "And I'm just a soldier who loves his people. But even soldiers need hope. You gave me that. Now I want to give something back." Steve leaned closer. "What do you mean?" The president's tone softened, almost like a father. "Come back to Burkina Faso. Just for one day. There's someone I want you to meet." Steve froze. Those words rang in his ears like prophecy. He didn't know it yet, but that invitation would change everything. The calling. That night, Steve couldn't sleep. He tossed. He turned. The line kept circling in his head. "That voice helped raise me." He thought about his mother. The woman who told him he would become something. He remembered his prayer from years ago, spoken from the back seat of his car, broken. "God, if I ever get famous, let my words mean something. Let them matter to someone who really needs them." And now. This. The decision. He went live again that evening, no lights, no applause. Just a single live stream and a man holding a letter. "Y'all," he said, "I've been blessed. Fame. Money. Success. But this?" He held the letter to his chest. "This is different. This is God." He paused. "I gave a promise once. And I'm keeping it." The return flight. The next day, Steve boarded a private flight back to Burkina Faso. No press. No PR team. Just his assistant, a translator, and an old leather journal he hadn't opened in years. As the plane cut through the clouds, he held the letter again. One line circled in red ink. "I wish my mother could have seen the man you helped me become." He closed his eyes. Whispered to the sky. "Lord, what did I do to deserve this?" Mid-flight, his assistant handed him an envelope with a wax seal. From President Traoré. Inside, a handwritten note. "When you land, don't think like a celebrity. Think like a son, coming home." Steve pressed it to his chest. He didn't know what was waiting for him. But deep inside, something whispered. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about healing. For both of them. The wheels touched down. The plane rolled across the dusty tarmac. And just as the sun rose over Ouagadougou, Steve Harvey stepped out once again. Not as a star. Not as a guest. But as a brother. Coming home. No crowds. No red carpets. No microphones. Just the steady hum of heat and wind, two black SUVs parked on a sun-bleached runway, and a single man standing tall at the edge of the stairs. President Ibrahim Traoré. Soldier. Leader. Brother. Steve Harvey descended slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. He wasn't walking off a plane, he was walking into something sacred. And then, no pomp, no protocol, Traoré stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. Long, fierce. Quiet. A brother's hug. A son's welcome. "You came," the president said, voice low. Steve, choked by emotion, could only nod. "I had to," he whispered. They rode in silence. The SUVs rolled through dusty streets where life pulsed in rhythms unchanged by time, market chatter, goats grazing by open shops, laughter skipping through alleyways. Children stood barefoot by the roadside, waving wild, clutching paper signs marked with shaky handwriting. "Steve. Welcome, big brother. Thank you for speaking to us." Steve smiled through tears. But the real moment hadn't come yet. The convoy pulled to a stop, not at a palace, but at a crumbling corner of a street market. It was quiet there. Traoré walked ahead, his pace slower now, more reverent. Steve followed until they reached a sagging wooden table covered in dust. The president pointed. "This," he said softly, "was my grandmother's stall. Right here. Under this tarp, is where I used to crouch beside her. Counting coins. Listening to a crackling radio." Steve stared. "Your voice," Traoré continued, "used to come through that static. I didn't know the words. But I knew the man behind them had something I needed." He knelt. Picked up a small, sun-warmed stone. Placed it into Steve's open palm. "This," he said, "is where hope began." Steve didn't say a word. He couldn't. He cried. Silently. And beside him, so did the president. An hour later, the car rolled to a stop outside a small village. The trees swayed lazily, and the light softened as the sun dipped lower in the sky. A group of women waited beneath a mango tree. One stepped forward, slow, fragile, elegant in her age. "Sarah," said the president. "The last of the women who used to sit with my grandmother at this market. She remembers you." Steve blinked. "But, how?" Traoré smiled. "They didn't speak your language. But they felt your joy. Sarah used to say, 'That man has a heart that speaks louder than his tongue.'" Sarah stepped forward. Her hands shook slightly. The translator leaned close, gently repeating her words. "You made hard days feel lighter," she said. "My sister, Traoré's grandmother, she would laugh when she heard you. She said, 'That man reminds me we are still alive.'" Steve dropped to one knee. Tears streaming, unstoppable. Sarah reached out with trembling fingers and cupped his cheek. She whispered something in more. The translator hesitated, voice cracking. She said, "My sister would have fed you, if she had met you. She would have called you her son." Steve collapsed into her arms. No performance. No TV. Just a boy, finding his other mother. The world watching was silent. Because for once, words weren't enough. That evening, they took him to a small school tucked serré behind tall grasses and trees. No stage. No microphones. Just a dirt courtyard, soft drums, and rows of children in colorful clothes, waiting nervously for his arrival. As Steve stepped in, they began to sing. A simple melody. Soft, rhythmic, ancient. The translator leaned close. "It's a song the president's grandmother used to hum while cooking at the market. Now the children sing it, in her memory." Steve froze. His eyes widened. "I remember this," he whispered, stunned. "My grandma in Cleveland, she used to hum something like this when I cried." Traoré looked over at him, arms folded, voice steady. "Our grandmothers," he said, "gave us the same comfort, thousands of miles apart." Steve sat down on the wooden bench. The drums played on, but time stopped. A little girl approached. She handed him a carving, rough wood, 2 hands holding a heart. Steve clutched it, and something inside broke. Openly. Loudly. Fully. Not the kind of cry the world applauds. The kind the soul needs. Years of pain. Of pretending. Of wondering if his voice ever mattered. It all poured out under that African sky. The comedian from Cleveland. The soldier from Ouagadougou. Now 2 sons, mourning the grandmothers who raised them with love and strength, and somehow, impossibly, the same melody. The world didn't see celebrities anymore. Only 2 boys. Reunited by something greater than blood. Bound by something deeper than fame. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting amber light over the open land. There was no ceremony, no parade, just the quiet crunch of tires on gravel as Steve Harvey's car rolled to a stop. President Ibrahim Traoré stood waiting beneath a wide, graceful tree, its branches spread like arms welcoming a traveler home. He wasn't flanked by guards. No cameras hovered. Only silence, and purpose. As Steve stepped out, Traoré approached with something wrapped in a red ribbon, a scroll, old-fashioned and simple. "This land," the president said, handing it to him, "is yours now. A gift from Burkina Faso. A place of rest. A sanctuary. Whenever the world feels too loud, this will be waiting." Steve stared at the scroll, heart pounding. "I didn't come for a reward," he murmured. "I came because your letter reminded me that I'm still a man first." Traoré nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "And you reminded us that we are seen. That our stories matter. That we are not invisible." They stood beneath the tree, the wind moving softly through the leaves, brushing against their faces like a memory you never knew you had. Then, in a moment that defied title or rank, Traoré sank to one knee and placed a hand over Steve's heart. "I don't kneel often," he said, eyes lifted. "But I kneel for those who carry light into darkness." Steve dropped to his knees too. And for a long moment, two powerful men, one in a suit, one in soul-deep humility, wept like children beneath the branches of an African tree. Not for the cameras. Not for history. But for the women who had raised them. For the pain they never spoke aloud. For the grace of being found. The return flight. Steve left quietly the next morning. No press. No interviews. No spotlight trailing his footsteps. He returned home not as a celebrity, but as someone changed. Humbled. Restored. On his first show back, there were no booming jokes, no over-the-top intros. He walked on stage holding a small wooden carving, two hands, gently cradling a heart. The gift from the children in Burkina Faso. He placed it on his desk like a sacred offering, then faced the camera. "I've been blessed beyond what I ever dreamed," he said softly. "I've held serrards. I've shaken hands with presidents. But this is different." He took a breath. "I met a man, a leader not just of a country, but of spirit. President Ibrahim Traoré reminded me that what we say, what we do, can ripple farther than we'll ever know." He paused, his voice growing tight. "He called me Africa's son. And I call him my brother." Then, without introduction, Steve pressed a button, and the studio filled with the sound of young voices. The children of Burkina Faso. Singing. No subtitles. No explanation. Just the sound of innocence, faith, and history sung through a new generation. The room fell into a silence so deep, it felt sacred. Across the world, millions watched with wet cheeks and open hearts. Because this wasn't a political moment. This wasn't a PR stunt. It was pure. It was truth. A message to the world. If you're reading this now, if your heart stirred even a little, we invite you to do one simple thing. Comment below with one word. Healed. That's it. No speech. No filter. Just one word to remind the world, love still moves, kindness still matters, and stories still have the power to cross oceans. So let's send this feeling everywhere it needs to go. One voice. One heart. One act of grace at a time.